September 4th, 1994. Candlestick Park in San Francisco. A stadium filled with 70,000 screaming fans, witnessing a battle between two bitter rivals. The Oakland Raiders against the San Francisco 49ers. A Monday night game. Millions of viewers watching from coast to coast, and in exactly 3 seconds, every single one of them would witness something that would haunt their nightmares for the rest of their lives. Napoleon McCallum, the Raiders' running back, took a handoff and charged toward the line of scrimmage. It was a routine play, nothing special. The kind of play that happens hundreds of times in every NFL season. Then, linebacker Ken Norton Jr. arrived. What happened next was so violent, so grotesque, so utterly horrifying that television networks immediately cut away from the replay. Cameramen turned their lenses toward the ground. Commentators went silent, unable to find words for what they had just witnessed. Napoleon McCallum's left knee did not just bend, it did not just twist, it completely inverted, folding in a direction that human legs are never supposed to fold. Ligaments snapped like guitar strings. His kneecap dislocated entirely. Blood vessels tore apart inside his leg. Players from both teams immediately began waving frantically for medical staff. Some dropped to their knees, others turned away, unable to look. Hardened NFL veterans, men who had witnessed countless injuries throughout their careers, covered their mouths in horror. In the hospital hours later, doctors delivered news that made the injury itself seem like merely the beginning of the nightmare. Napoleon McCallum might lose his leg entirely. This is the story of the most horrifying injury the NFL has tried to forget. A story of a man who served his country while playing professional football. A man who defied every obstacle placed before him. A man whose career ended in a single moment so brutal that the league itself seemed to look away in shame. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will understand why Napoleon McCallum deserves to be remembered for so much more than the worst 3 seconds of his life. Long before the injury, long before the NFL, Napoleon McCallum was already defying expectations in ways that seemed almost impossible. He grew up in Milford, Ohio, a small town where dreams of professional football seemed distant and unrealistic. But Napoleon possessed 2 qualities that would define his entire existence: blazing speed and an unbreakable will. By the time he reached high school, college recruiters were already circling. His combination of quickness, power, and intelligence made him one of the most sought-after running backs in the country. But Napoleon McCallum did not choose a football factory. He did not select a program known for sending players to the NFL. Instead, he made a decision that shocked the recruiting world. He chose the United States Naval Academy. To understand how radical this choice was, you must understand what attending the Naval Academy means. It is not simply a college, it is a commitment to serve your country for 5 years after graduation. 5 years of active military duty. 5 years where professional football would be completely impossible. Every coach and scout who watched Napoleon play knew he had NFL talent. Choosing the Naval Academy meant potentially sacrificing that future entirely. It meant prioritizing service over stardom, country over career. Napoleon did not hesitate. At the Naval Academy, he became a legend. He rushed for over 4,000 yards during his college career, shattering records that had stood for decades. He was named an All-American. He became the most celebrated player in Navy football history. And when the 1984 NFL Draft arrived, the Raiders selected him in the 4th round. But here is where Napoleon McCallum's story takes a turn that has never been replicated in professional sports history. He could not simply report to training camp like every other draft pick. He had a commitment to honor, a nation to serve. The United States Navy was not going to release him from his obligations just because a football team wanted him. So Napoleon McCallum did both. For 2 seasons, Napoleon McCallum lived a double life that defied all logic and reason.
During the week, he served as a naval officer aboard the USS California, a nuclear-powered guided missile cruiser stationed in San Diego. He stood watch. He completed his duties. He fulfilled every obligation expected of a military officer. Then on weekends, he would receive special permission to fly to wherever the Raiders were playing. He would suit up, take the field against professional athletes who spent their entire week preparing, and perform at an elite level. Imagine the physical and mental demands of this arrangement. Other running backs spent their weeks studying film, resting their bodies, practicing plays until the movements became instinct. Napoleon McCallum spent his weeks serving his country, sleeping in military quarters, performing duties that had nothing to do with football. And yet, he still produced. In his rookie season, despite the impossible circumstances, he rushed for over 500 yards. He proved that his talent was genuine, that he could compete with the best even without the preparation time that every other player enjoyed. The sports world watched in amazement. Here was a man literally serving 2 masters, honoring 2 commitments, living 2 lives simultaneously. It had never been done before. It has never been done since. But Napoleon McCallum wanted more. He wanted to see what he could become if football received his full attention. In 1986, after completing his mandatory active duty service, Napoleon stepped away from the NFL to fulfill reserve obligations and explore other opportunities. For 4 years, he was absent from professional football entirely. Most people assumed his career was over. A nice story, they said, a remarkable achievement for a military man. But surely, after 4 years away from the game, he could not return and compete with athletes in their prime. Napoleon McCallum heard those doubts, and in 1990, at 27 years old, he returned to the Oakland Raiders to prove every single doubter wrong. The second chapter of Napoleon McCallum's NFL career was even more impressive than the first. Freed from military obligations, he could finally dedicate himself fully to football, and the results were extraordinary. In 1990, he rushed for nearly 500 yards, despite splitting carries with other backs. In 1991, he recorded over 900 total yards from scrimmage. By 1993, he had become one of the most reliable weapons in the Raiders' offense. His running style was unique among NFL backs. He combined the discipline and mental toughness of a military officer with the explosive athleticism of an elite professional athlete. He never complained, he never made excuses. He simply showed up, worked harder than anyone expected, and produced results. Teammates adored him. Coaches trusted him completely. Fans who remembered his impossible rookie season, splitting time between a nuclear cruiser and professional football, embraced him as a symbol of everything the Raiders represented. Here was a man who refused to accept limitations, who served his country with honor, and then returned to dominate on the football field, who proved that commitment and character could triumph over every obstacle. By 1994, Napoleon McCallum was entering the prime of his career. At 31 years old, he had finally assembled all the pieces: full health, complete focus, a team that believed in him. The season opener against the San Francisco 49ers was supposed to be a showcase, a statement game against a hated rival, the beginning of something special. Instead, it became the end of everything. The play itself was nothing unusual. Napoleon McCallum took a handoff from quarterback Jeff Hofstadler and headed toward the left side of the offensive line. It was a simple running play designed to gain a few yards and move the chains. Ken Norton Jr., the 49ers linebacker, read the play perfectly. He shot through a gap and arrived just as Napoleon was planting his left leg to cut upfield. What happened next was pure physics combined with catastrophic misfortune. Another defender grabbed Napoleon from behind, holding him in place. Ken Norton's momentum carried him directly into Napoleon's planted left knee. The leg was locked in position, unable to move or adjust, all the force of a professional linebacker traveling at full speed, concentrated on a single joint. The knee
did not stand a chance. It bent backward at an angle that made viewers across America gasp in horror. The dislocation was immediate and complete. Ligaments that had held the joint together for 31 years shredded instantly. But the visible damage was only the beginning. Inside Napoleon's leg, an artery had torn. Blood began pooling rapidly. The injury was not just orthopedic, it was vascular, life-threatening. Medical staff rushed onto the field. Players from both teams stood in stunned silence. The crowd, moments earlier roaring with energy, fell into an eerie quiet. Napoleon McCallum was loaded onto a stretcher and rushed to the hospital. And for several agonizing hours, the question was not whether he would play football again. The question was whether he would keep his leg. The surgery lasted over 6 hours. Doctors worked desperately to repair the torn artery before permanent damage occurred. The blood supply to Napoleon's lower leg had been compromised. Without restoration, the tissue would begin dying. Amputation would become the only option. His family waited in a hospital hallway, not knowing if their husband, their father, their son would emerge whole or forever altered. Inside the operating room, surgeons performed miracles. They repaired the artery, they restored blood flow, they saved the leg. But the knee itself was devastated beyond anything they had ever seen. Every major ligament was torn, the joint capsule was destroyed, nerves were damaged, the structural integrity of the knee simply no longer existed. Napoleon McCallum would never play football again. That much was certain the moment he arrived at the hospital. But at least he would walk. At least he would live a normal life. At least the worst possible outcome had been avoided. When he finally awoke from surgery, surrounded by family and teammates, Napoleon McCallum received the news with the same dignity and composure that had defined his entire life. His football career was over, ended in an instant, on a routine play through no fault of his own. But he was alive. He had his leg. He had his family. He had decades of life still ahead of him. For a man who had already overcome impossible odds just to reach the NFL, perhaps this was simply the next obstacle to conquer. The months and years that followed tested Napoleon McCallum in ways that football never had. Rehabilitation was grueling. Learning to walk again required patience and determination that would have broken most people. The knee that surgeons had pieced back together would never function normally. Every step reminded him of what he had lost. But Napoleon refused to become bitter. He refused to define himself by the worst moment of his career. He refused to let a single play erase everything he had accomplished. Instead, he rebuilt his life with the same discipline and work ethic that had carried him through the Naval Academy, through military service, through the impossible balancing act of his rookie season. He entered the business world and found success. He became a motivational speaker, sharing his story with audiences who needed to hear that setbacks do not have to define outcomes. He raised a family and watched his children grow. And he did it all on a leg that doctors once considered removing entirely. The NFL, meanwhile, seemed eager to move on from the memory of that night in Candlestick Park. The injury was rarely discussed. Replays almost never aired. It was as if the league itself wanted to forget that such a thing could happen to one of its players. The violence that audiences usually celebrated had, for one terrible moment, become too real to process. But those who witnessed it never forgot. Players who were on the field that night have spoken about it in interviews decades later, their voices still carrying traces of trauma. Fans who watched on television remember exactly where they were sitting, exactly how they felt when the cameras cut away. Napoleon McCallum's injury became a ghost story whispered among NFL circles, a reminder that the game these men play exacts prices that sometimes cannot be measured in statistics. What should Napoleon McCallum be remembered for? Should he be remembered for the injury, for those 3 horrifying seconds that ended his career and nearly claimed his leg? Or should he be remembered for everything else? For choosing service over stardom when he selected the Naval Academy? For serving his country on a nuclear cruiser while simultaneously competing against the best athletes on Earth? for walking away from football to honor his commitments, and then returning at 27 years old to prove he still belonged. For the 900-yard seasons, for the touchdowns, for the respect of every teammate and coach who ever worked alongside him. Napoleon McCallum's career statistics will never land him in the Hall of Fame. His name does not appear on lists of the greatest Raiders running backs. The injury stole the prime years that might have elevated him to legendary status. But his story transcends statistics. He represents something that modern sports often lacks: duty, honor, sacrifice, the understanding that some things matter more than personal glory. The injury that ended his career was brutal and random and unfair, but it did not define him. It did not break him. It became simply another chapter in a life filled with obstacles overcome and expectations shattered. The Raiders have witnessed countless players over the decades, superstars and role players, champions and disappointments, men who became legends and men who were forgotten. Napoleon McCallum belongs in a category all his own. He served his country. He played professional football under circumstances no one else has ever replicated. He gave everything to the silver and black until his body could give no more. And when the worst moment came, he faced it with courage. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that there is more to football than highlights and championships, then subscribe to this channel. Join Raider Nation as we continue uncovering the untold stories of the silver and black. Leave a comment telling me what you felt watching this video. Tell me which Raider story you want to hear next. I read every single comment, and your voice matters.